Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of St. Augustine's Confessions. We are in Book VI, picking up on number 10. Let's begin. We were dealing with Alypius, and he was a student of St. Augustine, and he's just talking about the young lad's struggles and such. So we're continuing upon that vein. Let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I found him in Rome when I arrived. He became very closely attached to me, and came to me with Milan so that we need not part, and also because he wanted to put his legal studies into practice, though this was more his parents' wish than his own. He had already acted 3 times as assessor with an integrity that was a source of wonder to his colleagues. So, lots of integrity. Though to him it was astonishing that anyone would prefer wealth before honesty. Think about that. So, he's talking about his character here. Do you prefer to be honest, or do you prefer wealth? But it was not only by inducements of bribery that his character was put to the test. He was also subjected to intimidation. So bribery, intimidation. When he was in Rome acting as assessor to the controller of Italian provincial funds, there was a very influential senator who held large numbers of people in his power, either because he had granted them favors or because they had reason to fear him. So, influential senator. So, favors or fear? Favors or fear? I put pine cones in the cage and the bird's having fun. In his usual domineering way, he attempted to obtain some privilege to which he had no right in law. Alypius refused to grant it. A bribe was offered and he contemptuously turned it down. Threats followed and he rebuffed them. Everyone was amazed by his extraordinary self-possession. So, extraordinary self-possession. For although this formidable man had earned widespread notoriety for his innumerable methods of patronizing or injuring others, Alypius neither desired him as friend nor feared him as an enemy. So, earned widespread notoriety for being patronizing or injuring. So this person, clearly this senator, was very corrupt, trying to make moves on Alypius. Alypius neither desired him as a friend. Even the judge for whom Alypius was acting as assessor agreed that the privilege should not be granted, though he would not openly refuse it, declaring that he could do nothing in face of Alypius's attitude. He left the case in his hands, and in fact, if he had acted himself, Alypius would have left the court. So how many of us, when you think about it, I mean, Lauren Chen just got in trouble for her and her tenant media and her husband taking some money from the Russians to give pro-Russian stances. I mean, there's openly people who are paid to speak pro-Israel talking points. So it's kind of confusing when you really see, like, why can't people be paid to promote stuff? Yeah, you want the internet to be genuine, but grifter's gonna grift, right? And people call that a form of bribery, like they sold out, right? And so there's others who, when they live in a different country, they're intimidated to shut their mouths, right? And, like, for example, let's say you're speaking against the cartels in Mexico. They make a move on you, like, hey, you better shut your mouth. Especially, they put a lot of pressures on the law. There's a lot of judges who have to cover their faces when giving verdicts. You can look that up. I remember watching some videos where the judges were dealing with sentencing narcos, and they had to cover their face. And so, you think about briberies, intimidation, favors, fear. These are all really big problems that don't seem to go away when it comes to politics, right? There was only one temptation to which he nearly yielded through his love of literature, and this was to have books copied for him at the special rates available to government officials. So notice this. So we have the printing press now, obviously, and we can mass produce books, but in this time period, I believe people had to do it by hand because the printing press was invented later, from my knowledge. And it was costly. At this time, people had to do it by hand with scribes, I believe they were called. So that's interesting that government officers got different rates than the common person. But he conscientiously chose the better course and decided that honest principles, which forbade the deal, were more precious than the opportunity which made it possible. So think about, he has a very niche temptation. So a niche temptation. We may be thinking, that's so dumb, it's so minuscule. But I do recall, and you can look this up, there was an American, I believe, and she sold out secrets, I think it was to China, for sushi. Part of the deal was unlimited sushi. Like, type in keywords, woman sells secrets to spies for sushi, and you might get it. But, you know, what people have as niche desires is, like, very telling. Because to us it might be trivial. Others may not see it that way, right? This is a small matter, but he who is trustworthy over a little sum is trustworthy over a greater. The words of Christ, the voice of your truth, can never be unmeaning. And it was he who said, if you then could not be trusted to use the base riches you had, who will put the true riches in your keeping? Who will give you property of your own, if you could not be trusted with what was only lent you? Luke 16:10-12. These were the qualities I knew of Alypius, who was my close friend and, like myself, was perplexed to know what course of life we ought to follow. Nebridius was also with us. He had left his own town near Carthage, and Carthage itself, where he had spent much of his time. He had given up his house and his family's richest estate in the country, and had left his mother, who refused to come with him. He had come to Milan for no other purpose than to live with me, so that we might be together in our fervent search for truth and wisdom. His distress was not less than mine, and, like me, he wavered between one course and another, desperately seeking the way of happiness, and prying closely into the problems which troubled us most. His friend Nebridius. I think that's pretty cool that he had a friend who also was really spiritual and gave up a rich estate. I mean, hello. We were like 3 hungry mouths, able only to gasp out our needs to one another, while our eyes were on you, waiting for you to grant us in due time our nourishment, and in all the bitter disappointments by which your mercy thwarted our undertaking in this world. We tried to see the reason for our sufferings. Notice this. Bitter disappointments by your mercy thwarted our undertaking. So this makes me think about, like, the prayer istihara that we do. Like, we ask Allah, if it's good for us, let us have it, basically, but if it's not, keep it away from us. So when you want to get married, you could do the istihara prayer, right? So maybe you wanted a job opportunity, you didn't get it, it's a bitter disappointment. Allah, thwarting is like a disturbance, a putting something to an end, not letting you attain something. And so that's an interesting way of looking at it. And your undertakings, like your goals, the things that you want, the things that you take upon yourself. So if you're not getting something that you wanted, you need to look at it as, hey, it may be a bitter disappointment, but You know, it may be a mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't give us that. Right? How long is this to be? Again and again we asked ourselves this question. But we did not relinquish our worldly aims, because we could not see the light of any truth that we might grasp in place of them. Perfect. I like that. We did not relinquish our worldly aims. So, steadfast, enduring. So, grit in a way. They didn't give up. So, didn't give up. Think about that. How long is this going to be? I think we've all had that moment. When am I going to get over this? When will it end? Maybe I should just give up because it's too hard. But if you're passionate about what you're doing, you realize, like, okay, I can't do it. But again, there are things where something becomes difficult and you realize, you know what? I'm going to drop the potato. It's too hot for my hands, so I'm going to drop it. Alright. But then there's things that you have to hold on, and it's going to hurt. You know? So the wisdom to know when to let go and when to tighten your grip. Number 11. I found much to bewilder me in my memories of the long time which had passed since I was 19, the age at which I had first begun to search in earnest for truth and wisdom, and had promised myself that, once I had found them, I would give up all the vain hopes and mad delusions which sustained my futile ambitions. Notice this. So, vain hopes, mad delusions, futile ambitions. I realized that I was now 30 years old and was still floundering in the same quagmire because I was greedy to enjoy what the world has to offer. Ooh. I was greedy to enjoy what the world has to offer. Think about how this will come to mind when I think about it. Some women are like, you know what, I'm going to put up having a family so that I can be hot, travel, fornicate, party all around the world, and just drink up what the world has to offer. That's why some women, when they pass their hoe phase, and now they're 30, they've hit the wall, and they're like, oh, now I'm going to get spiritual. I realized that, you know, my desires led me astray, that I couldn't satiate my greed. I had this pursuance of something, and I was enjoying it, and I thought if I got to the end of this gluttonous goal that it was going to be some type of way, but you find out it wasn't. So, we have to be mindful that the earth has adornments, and we have to think, how much can we really get? Though it only eluded me and wasted my strength. So, eluded him, wasted my strength. So you're using a lot of your energy to chase that goal. And all the time I had been telling myself one tale after another. Tomorrow I shall discover the truth. I shall see it quite plainly, and it will be mine to keep. Faustus will come and explain everything. The academics, what wonderful men they are, it is truly that we can never know for certain how we ought to manage our lives, ... Know that we must search all the more carefully, and never despair. So never despair, careful searching. I can see now that the passages in Scripture which I used to think absurd are not absurd at all. They can be understood in another sense. Quite fairly, I shall fix my foot firmly on the step where my parents set me as a boy, until I find the manifest truth. But where and when am I to look for it? Ambrose has no time to spare, and I have no time for reading. Where am I to look for the books I need? It's interesting. Today we have so much knowledge at our fingertips, but now people don't read. They ask, what are the cliff notes? But they played the video game for a long time. To be fair, some video games have some reading in them, but not the same as reading a book, right? But, well, I mean, lots of bookstores are controlled, right? Barnes & Noble, their philosophy section was abysmal. But you do have Amazon, you have used bookstores, you have yard sales, you have people where they keep retired books that are no longer being printed. You can search all over the world for very niche books, right? It's a blessing. And we have free libraries now, but how many people will use that? And Google, I mean, don't get me started about them. They totally censor reality. Where and when can I buy them or get someone to lend them to me? I must plan my time and arrange my day for the good of my soul. So I must plan my time and arrange my day for the good of my soul. So for us Muslims, we have our prayer, our salah. Okay? That helps us to arrange our day, and that's good for our soul because we gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through prayer. Therefore, prayer helps our soul, right? So, something to think about. Great hope is born in me because I have found that the doctrines of the Catholic faith are not what I thought them to be, and my accusations were unfounded. The learned men of the church hold it wrong to believe that God is limited by the shape of a human body. See, I said that and I still believe it. No. Why then do I hesitate to knock so that the door may be opened to reveal what is still hidden from me? My pupils keep me busy all the morning, but how do I use the rest of my day? Why should I not spend it knocking at God's door? Yet if I did, when could I visit my influential friends whose patronage I need? When could I prepare the lessons for which I am paid by my students? When could I refresh my own mind by giving it a rest from the troubles which absorb it? So, refreshing your mind from the troubles that absorb it. Here we see the emphasis on time. Time. All this must go by the board. I must dismiss all these futile trifles from my mind and devote myself entirely to the search for truth. So notice here, I must dismiss all the futile trifles from my mind and devote myself entirely to the search for truth. So, futile trifles. What really matters in life? What's fascinating is I connect with this because when you're really into learning, you have this hunger and thirst for it, and you realize, maybe I don't need to go to that socialized event. Maybe I don't need to, you start organizing your day differently. And you have a smaller friend list. But again, lots of socializing is just networking manipulation. They're not really interested in being your friend, but rather what they can use and get from you. And how many people, they spend too much time socializing and having leisure when they need to be searching for truth. So, there's something to think about there. Life is a misery, and I do not know when death may come. If it steals upon me, shall I be in a fit state to leave this world? Where could I then learn all that I have neglected to learn in this life? Is it not more probable that I should have to pay a heavy penalty for my negligence? Suppose death puts an end to all care. Suppose that it cuts off together with the senses of the body. This is another problem to be solved. But it is unthinkable that this could be true. It is not for nothing. Not mere chance, but the towering authority of the Christian faith has spread throughout the world. God would never have done such wonderful things for us if the life of the soul came to an end with the death of the body. Why then do I delay? Why do I not abandon my worldly hopes and give up myself entirely to the search for God and the life of true happiness? So, asking himself, why is he delaying? Abandoning worldly hopes. So, worldly popes. The search for God. But not so fast. This life is too sweet. It has its own charms. They are not of small account. And a man must not lightly undertake to detach his mind from them, because to return to them later would be a disgrace. There is a sweetness to life, but there are cavities and diabetes. It would need little effort to win myself a position of some standing in the world. And what more could a man ask? I have many influential friends, and if I press for nothing more, I may at least obtain a governor's post. I could marry a wife who would bring me a small dowry, so that the exposed would be no burden, and this would be the limit of my ambitions. There have been many great men who have dedicated themselves to the pursuit of wisdom, so dedicating yourself to the pursuit of wisdom, even though they were married, and I might do well to follow their example. Yeah, in Islam, our sheikhs can get married, As I reasoned with myself in this way, my heart was buffeted hither and thither by winds blowing from opposite quarters. Time was passing, and I kept delaying my conversations to you. My God. Day after day, I postponed living in you. Living in you. That's not a phrase we have. There seems to be, they say the living God. So I hear the Christians say this. So, we cannot live in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That would be a difference from our perspective. From my knowledge, but I never put off the death which I died each day in myself. I longed for a life of happiness, but I was frightened to approach it in its own domain. And yet, while I fled from it, I still searched for it. I thought it would be too much for me to bear if I were to be deprived of a woman's love. In your mercy, you have given us a remedy to cure this weakness, but I gave it no thought, because I had never tried it for myself. Well, it's not healthy to be deprived. In Islam, we say when a man marries, he's completed half of his deen. For us, family is a blessing. Women are a fitna, but marriage is how you protect your private parts, I believe that continence was to be achieved by man's own power, which I knew that I did not possess. Fool that I was, I did not know that no man can be master of himself except of God's bounty. As your Bible tells us, and you would have given me this strength, if I had allowed the cries of my soul to beat upon your ears, and had faith firm enough to shed my troubles on you. So, firm faith to shed troubles. So, that sounds like how you would confess. Be like, hey, I'm gonna leave it up to my Maker to guide me and whatnot. Number 12. It was Alypius who prevented me from marrying, because he insisted that if I did so, we could not possibly live together in uninterrupted leisure. This sounds very homosexual. Devoted to the pursuit of wisdom as we had long desired to do. I mean, your bro is, what they call that, cock blocking? He's telling you don't marry, because we gotta search for wisdom. You can search for wisdom and have a wife. You may not have as much time, but it's healthy for a man to have intimacy, to be around the female energy of his wife. It, rejuvenating. Just being with your bros is like not. It's a bit weird, a bit queer. As for himself, even as a grown man, he was quite remarkably self-controlled in matters of sex. In early adolescence, he had the experience of sexual intercourse, but it had not become habitual. In fact, he had been ashamed of it and thought it degrading, and ever since he had lived a life of utmost chastity. It's only degrading if you did it in sin. Maybe he's gay. Because you can be ashamed of the sin, but to think of sex as degrading, I've never heard a heterosexual man call that. Only a bottom twink, For my part, I answered his arguments by points to the example of married men who had been lovers of wisdom, had served God well, and had retained the affection of their friends whom they had loyally loved in return. You owe more to your wife than your male compadres. But I was far from being the equal of these noble spirits. I was bound down by this disease of the flesh. Desiring a woman in your life isn't a disease of the flesh. You were created with hormones. And that's why getting married, you're allowed to have halal relations. Its deadly pleasures were a chain that I dragged along with me. Yet I was afraid to be freed from it. Well, you're never going to be freed of that hormone unless you become a eunuch and drink some type of stuff to make you never have an erection. A healthy heterosexual man cannot stop men wake up in the morning and they have an erection. They have wet dreams. It's natural in them. Unless you're not attracted to women, but then your fitna becomes men. So you can't really escape it. And I refused to accept the good advice of Alypius, repelling the hand that meant to loose my bonds, as though it only rubbed my sores. Moreover, the serpent used me as a mouthpiece to speak to Alypius himself. Satan twisted my words into snares that were meant to entice, and strewed them in the path to trap the feet of his victim, who walked in all innocence with no burden to bear. Alypius could not understand how it was that I, of whom he thought so highly, could be so firmly caught on the toils of sexual pleasures as to assert, whenever we discussed the subject, that I could not possibly endure a life of a celibate. I mean, it's not healthy. Only if you're a widow and you love your husband, you don't want to remarry, okay? But you gotta stay chaste if you're not going to remarry, right? But it's going to be a fitna. That's why we have fasting for men. To help them. The caught in the toils of wanting intimacy is a normal, healthy thing, because family is wealth. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't put the desire for reproduction in us, then no humans would exist. If you look at 20 minutes of intimacy, you have 9 months of and you get pregnant. There's 9 months of pregnancy. Let's say 2 years of breastfeeding, so 3 years basically of a woman's life changed a lot. Lack of sleep, she can't do as much. It's really difficult, right? If you have a colicky baby, screaming. Women can die in childbirth. So if we didn't have the actual desire for intimacy, and we were just like cold, dead robots, and people had to look at that, they would say, I don't think it's really worth it to have kids, because, if they didn't have the natural desire towards the opposite sex, right? Then you just opt out of it. You just wouldn't do it, and people would go down. And that's why when you see the hormones of men being disrupted, and they're not having kids, and women's hormones getting disrupted, you see reproduction rates going down. Well, it's not conducive. Be fruitful and multiply. Don't commit adultery. But the Bible doesn't tell you never marry, never have children. Intimacy is fine when you get married. Without it, it's like women get less stressed. Men need it. It's healthy for them. Okay? It's very healthy for men to unload themselves. To sweat, have the intimate connection with their wives. Women need to feel loved. There's a reason why there's crazy cat ladies. You can't, these women who are eating edibles and using dildos, They call themselves child-free. They're on antidepressants. They're addicted to alcohol. There's something wrong about their life. You know? Not to say that a mom with like 5 kids can't be stressed, right? But it is completely normal for us to want each other. Adam and Hawa, Eve. And in the Bible, didn't it say that it was not good that man be alone? So he created Eve. And he created it from the rib, which is close to the heart. Right? So, clearly, if the maker of the universe and everything that exists, mankind, jinn, and all that exists, had a man and a woman together, clearly, you would stand to reason that it means that we're supposed to be together. Being alone is painful. Okay? When I saw that he was puzzled by my words, I used to defend them by saying that there was a great difference between his own hasty, furtive experience and my enjoyment of a settled way of life. In his case, since he could scarcely remember the occasion, he might easily disparage it. But in mine, it required only the respectable name of marriage, and he needed no longer wonder why I found it impossible to turn my back upon it. It's totally weird. You can be spiritual. I mean, Abraham had a wife, and then he had Hagar, right? Noah had children. So if the prophets can have wives, why can't you followers of the Catholic faith have wives? We don't get to know about Joseph's and Moses and, Musa's family, right? But just because we're told that we don't know the names of their children doesn't mean they didn't have any. As a result of what I said, he began to wish to be married himself. Not because he had yielded to lust for pleasure of this kind, but simply out of curiosity. Because something wrong with a lad wanting to get married. I mean, look at women. To tell him, no, don't enjoy the wondrous delight of intimacy in marriage. Instead, just be alone, struggle with your hormones, and read books. What? What are you talking about? Not feeling like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had multiple wives. There was a time when he visited all of his wives in one night. When one of his wives was on her period, he would fondle them. Like, he was still romantic. It's totally normal for men to have sexual virility. I mean, men with good testosterone levels like women. Men get very creepy when they don't have some men. But I know that I don't remember his name. I think it was Ash-Shafi'i. I don't remember, so if I said the wrong name, forgive me, but there was a famous scholar who he was so busy studying Islam he never married. That does not mean that there's a rule that you should be celibate, because there's a hadith that talks about the Prophet ﷺ was answering a man who said, like, I'll never sleep. Another one said, like, I think he said about, I'll avoid food. The other one said, I'll be celibate. And the Prophet, peace be on him, told him, I sleep with women. Like, I have intimacy. So, you can't outdo the Prophet, peace be upon him. So, for us in Islam, there is zero shame on being married and, having relations that are halal. Not because he had yielded to lust for pleasure of this kind, but simply out of curiosity. He explained that he was eager to find out what it was without which my life, which he thought so pleasant, would seem so me no life but misery. His mind was free from the fetters by which mine was enchained. So he seems to admire the indifference. He sounds like he wants to be asexual, where he has zero sex drive. If he lived today, would he take that there's a chemical castration. So would he take that so that he can read? I mean, you can read books. I mean, intimacy with the woman is like, what? You're going to do it every other day for 20 minutes each session? That's not distracting you. It's not like you're engaged in the act for like 7 hours straight. Your wife's going to have duties, you know, like, how many hours can you read? You know, let's say you want to read for 6 hours. Well, dedicate some time to your wife. You literally can cuddle and read. What is he even talking about? You can even read naked with each other. He was amazed at my state of bondage, and amazement led to the desire to test it for himself. If he made the experiment, he was likely to fall into the very state which was the object of his amazement. For he was willing to make terms with death, and danger loved is death won. Neither of us was greatly influenced by the thought of such honor as we should earn by fulfilling the duties of maintaining a well-ordered marriage and raising a family. For my part, I was prisoner of habit, suffering cruel torments through trying to satisfy a lust that could never be satiated, while Alypius was being led by curiosity into a state of captivity. Curiosity. This was the state in which we remained until you, O God Most High, who formed us out of clay and never desert us, had pity on our misery and came to our aid in a wonderful way that we could not understand. So, I've never seen a Bible citation that says, if you want to be wise in religion, you can never have intimacy and you can never marry. Wouldn't it stand to reason that having a spiritual father would be a benefit to children? Wouldn't it stand to reason that if more spiritual people had children, that more children would have a better upbringing than just the drunkards having kids? Because how many criminals have a bunch of baby mamas? Think about that. So, if no wise spiritual people have children, that means less children have access to a spiritual household. See, in Islam, man can be spiritual, have 4 wives, have 4 kids each. Boom. Them kids are going to be raised in a nice household. You can be spiritual and love to have intimacy with your wife. And a wife can be spiritual and love to serve her husband's needs. It's part of the fitrah. It's part of our innate self. The abnormal aspect is not desiring it. Now, if you get married and you deny your husband's rights, and he goes to bed angry with you, the angels will curse you until he is pleased with you. Because man has that need and inclination. Okay? I recall the hadith about when the Prophet, peace be upon him, saw a beautiful woman in the marketplace, and then he hurried home, and I believe he slept with Zainab, and I'll be pleased with her. So it's natural for a man to say, hey, I'm going to fulfill my desires in a halal way with my wife, and still go out there and give dawah and everything like that. I think that's why the Catholic Church has such a high rate of causing immense trauma to children. And the Pope had a quote, look it up, where he said there's too much faggotry in the church already. Like, it's an old school faggotry. Is like, there's a cool way, like, you faggot. But then there's the old school way of saying, homosexuality and queer behavior. Slang and terms change over time. But he admitted there's a lot of homosexuals. And I recall a feminist. She was... was her name Margaret Sanger? I wish I could remember her name. But she was saying that you know, she was advocating for abortion. It was like a black and white film interview, and she was saying that these gay men in the church, they don't understand the plight of women because they don't even like women. And if you have spiritual men who don't like women, then when a woman comes to them, it's not going to be that great of advice. It's not in their nature. But then if you look at how women would ask serious questions concerning both public and private matters to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and he maintained shyness and he maintained decorum, you can see how when you understand and care about women and like women, you want what's best for them. And you understand their nature and their core self. So, if you see how the many men R-word each other in prison because they cannot handle being celibate and there's no women around, it's quite scary when you think about how few men can handle not having that. And you're like, whoa. Like, to the point where they become monsters. You know? Now, that doesn't mean we want hedonism. That doesn't mean we don't want people to control their nafs, their inner selves. But we must deal with reality. And we cannot shame masculine heterosexual men for liking women. What we should encourage them is to do it in the halal way, which is marriage. And children are a blessing. And nations need people in order to survive. To teach people you can be wise and be celibate, or you can be dumb and have intimacy, that's not a good either or. Because you're showing the young men that if they want to be wise believers, then they have to be celibate. There's a difference. Stay pure till you're married. Then when you get married, have fun. Go on to your women how you will, as many times as you want. Have children. Be fruitful, multiply. So I find this quite bizarre. So we'll put lust, celibacy, pleasure, it's pretty suspect that these two men want to live with each other and are telling each other, there's no big deal, you know, I'm so over intimacy, I don't even need it, that sounds a bit strange. Or maybe the women were just very stinky and ugly back then in their area. You know, they didn't have indoor plumbing, and it was very hard to be like today. Alhamdulillah, women, the shower's right there, so your hair can be super shiny. You know, you can be fresh, on point. You got laundry machines, got spas, lots of stuff. More nutrition, clean water. So I think today women are more beautiful than they were in the past. We have toothpaste, mouthwash, floss, dentists, you know. Your period is pretty easy to deal with now. You don't have to bleed into a rag. You know. You see what I'm saying? So maybe the women in his vicinity were not that, like, clean. So it was easier to be like, no thanks. You know. Maybe they weren't as in shape either. Like, women today, we can work out. So our muscles are different. Maybe those women were either anorexic and underdeveloped. I don't know, but it's highly suspect. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help men to be pure and help people to make good decisions concerning marriage, inshallah. Very unique section, I must say, that I enjoyed reading very much. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to read more about what I write, you can do so by going to www.subscribestar.com/mahanarchive. Hope to see you there.